At exactly 2:13 in the morning, Daniel heard footsteps outside his bedroom door. 3 slow steps, then silence. He stayed completely still, listening. A few seconds later, he heard them again. 4 steps this time. But there was something wrong. Daniel lived alone. The front door was locked. Every window was shut, and there was no possible way anyone could have gotten inside. Then the footsteps stopped directly outside his bedroom. Daniel stared at the door. The handle slowly moved down, and that was when he heard a voice whisper from the other side. "Daniel, I know you're awake." The terrifying part, Daniel never told anyone that he was home that night. So who was standing outside his door? Part 1. The night it started, Daniel had never been the kind of person who believed in ghosts. He believed there was an explanation for everything. Old houses made strange noises. Pipes knocked inside walls. Wind moved loose branches against windows. And sometimes when you were alone at night, your own imagination could turn an ordinary sound into something terrifying. That was exactly what Daniel told himself on the night everything began. It was a cold Thursday night in November. Daniel had returned home shortly after midnight. The neighborhood was unusually quiet. No cars passed his house. No neighbors were outside. Even the streetlights seemed strangely dim through the fog. He locked the front door, checked the windows, and went upstairs. Nothing seemed unusual. He changed clothes, turned off the lights downstairs, and went into his bedroom. At around 2:13 a.m., Daniel woke up. He didn't know what had awakened him. For several seconds, he simply stared into the darkness. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps. Coming from downstairs. Daniel held his breath. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. Step. He waited. The sound stopped. He almost laughed at himself. Maybe it was the heating system. Maybe something had fallen. Then another sound came from the hallway. Step. Daniel sat up. The footsteps were no longer downstairs. They were upstairs, and they were coming toward his bedroom. Part 2. Someone is walking. Daniel reached for his phone. The screen lit up the room for just a moment. 2:16 a.m. He turned the brightness down and listened again. Nothing. The hallway outside his bedroom was completely silent. Daniel slowly moved toward the door. He didn't open it. Instead, he placed his ear against the wood. At first, there was nothing. Then, a single step, right outside. Daniel froze. Another step, closer. He could hear the floorboards creaking under the weight of someone walking. But whoever or whatever it was seemed to be moving incredibly slowly. Daniel backed away from the door. His first thought was an intruder. Maybe someone had broken into the house. He grabbed his phone and called emergency services. But before the call connected, the footsteps stopped. Daniel looked at the door. Silence. He waited another 10 seconds, then 20. Nothing. Finally, he opened the door. The hallway was empty. No person. No movement. Nothing. Daniel checked the stairs. Empty. He checked the bathroom. Empty. Then he checked every room downstairs. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The front door was still locked. The windows were still closed. There was no sign that anyone had entered. Daniel returned upstairs, confused and embarrassed by his own fear. But as he reached his bedroom, he noticed something on the floor. 3 fresh footprints. They started at the top of the stairs and ended directly outside his bedroom door. Daniel stared at them. They were wet, but it hadn't rained that night. And the strangest part was that there were no footprints leading toward the stairs. Only 3 footprints, as if whoever made them had simply appeared in the hallway. Part 3. The impossible detail. Daniel didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He kept staring at those 3 footprints. Eventually, he convinced himself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he had stepped outside earlier and forgotten. Maybe the footprints were older than he thought. Maybe moisture had somehow appeared on the floor. But the more he looked at them, the less sense they made. The footprints were too clear. Each one showed the outline of toes. The size was roughly that of an adult man's foot, and all 3 pointed directly toward Daniel's bedroom. At sunrise, Daniel cleaned the floor. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't want to sound paranoid. The next night, however, something happened that made it impossible to dismiss. At 2:13 a.m., Daniel woke up again. Same time, same sound. Step, pause, step, pause. He reached for his phone. 2:13. The footsteps were coming from downstairs. Daniel stayed in bed. He didn't move. He listened. The footsteps slowly climbed the stairs, 1 step at a time. Then they reached the hallway. Daniel's heart began pounding. The footsteps stopped. right outside his bedroom. And then came something he hadn't heard the night before, a soft knock.
3 times.
Knock, knock, knock. Daniel didn't answer. A few seconds passed. Then a whisper came through the door, his own voice. Daniel. He stopped breathing. The voice whispered again. Open the door. Daniel stared at the handle because he suddenly remembered something. He had never told anyone his new address, and nobody outside his family even knew he lived there. Yet whatever was standing outside his bedroom knew his name. Part 4. It follows Daniel didn't open the door. He sat on the edge of his bed staring at the handle. For almost a full minute, nothing happened. Then he heard the footsteps move away. One step, then another. They slowly traveled down the hallway. Daniel waited until he could no longer hear them. Then he grabbed his phone and ran downstairs. The front door was still locked. Every window was shut. Nothing appeared to be disturbed. But when Daniel looked toward the kitchen, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The back door was open. He was certain he had locked it. He rushed toward it and pulled it shut. Then he noticed muddy footprints across the kitchen floor. They continued toward the hallway. Daniel followed them. The footprints stopped at the bottom of the stairs. There was nothing beyond them. No return footprints. No sign of anyone leaving. That was when Daniel realized something terrifying. Whatever had entered his house hadn't walked back out. Daniel called his brother and asked him to come over. His brother arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the entire house together. Nothing. His brother laughed nervously and told him he was probably exhausted. Then Daniel showed him the footprints. His brother stopped smiling. Neither of them could explain them. That night, Daniel refused to sleep upstairs. He stayed on the living room couch with every light turned on. At 2:13 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they started inside the living room. Part 5. The Hidden Connection. Daniel. His brother heard them too. That changed everything. They both stood completely still. The footsteps moved across the living room, but there was nobody there. The floorboards creaked one after another. Slowly, deliberately, they watched an empty section of carpet as if someone invisible was walking across it. Then the footsteps stopped. Daniel's brother whispered, "We're leaving." They grabbed their jackets and headed for the front door. But before Daniel could unlock it, 3 knocks came from the other side. Knock, knock, knock. His brother looked at him. "Is someone outside?" Daniel didn't answer. They opened the door. Nobody was there. But on the porch were 3 wet footprints. His brother immediately pulled Daniel away from the doorway. The next morning, Daniel searched the history of the house. He discovered something he had never been told. The previous owner had lived there for almost 30 years. And according to an old local newspaper article, the man's adult son had disappeared from the property one winter night. He was never found. The article mentioned one strange detail. Neighbors had reported hearing footsteps inside the house for several nights. After his disappearance, Daniel felt cold reading that sentence. He kept searching. Then he found an old photograph of the missing man. Daniel stared at it for several seconds. There was something familiar about him. Not his face. His shoes, the same unusual boots Daniel had seen in the photograph, were described in the article as the last thing the man was known to be wearing. And according to the police report, his footprints had been found inside the house, but none had been found outside. Daniel suddenly understood why the footsteps never seemed to leave. Maybe they weren't coming into the house. Maybe they had been there all along. Part 6. The final night Daniel decided to leave the house. He packed a bag that afternoon. He told himself he would never return. But before he could leave, something happened that made him change his mind. He found an old wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards in his bedroom. Inside was a collection of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Most were about the previous owner, but one note was different. It was dated decades earlier. Only one sentence had been written on it. "If you hear the footsteps, never follow them." Daniel read it twice. Then he heard a step behind him. He turned. Nothing. Another step, this time from the hallway. Daniel slowly walked toward the door. The footsteps moved downstairs. He knew he should leave. Instead, he followed them. The sound led him into the basement. The basement was dark and cold. The footsteps stopped near the far wall. Daniel switched on his flashlight. There was nothing there. Then his light caught something carved into the wall. A name. The missing man's name. Underneath it were dozens of lines. Each line appeared to represent a night. Daniel counted them. 32. Then he noticed the newest line. It had been scratched into the wall recently. The date was yesterday. Daniel stepped backward. His flashlight suddenly flickered. Then the footsteps began again, behind him. 1 step, 2, 3. Daniel turned around. Nothing. But the footsteps continued. They were getting closer. And then he heard his own voice whisper from the darkness. Daniel. He ran. He didn't look back. But the footsteps followed him all the way upstairs. Part 7. What was really there? Daniel reached the front door and pulled it open. He ran outside. His brother was waiting in the car. Daniel jumped inside and told him to drive. Neither of them spoke until they were several miles away. Daniel never went back that night. The next morning, he returned with his brother and a police officer. The house was completely silent. There were no wet footprints, no open doors, no signs of an intruder. But the basement wall was still there. So were the carved lines. And there was something else. A new line had appeared. Daniel's brother stared at it. The date was that morning. Neither of them could explain how it had been made. Daniel moved out of the house a few days later. He never heard the footsteps again, at least not while he was awake. But several months later, he received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the hallway outside his old bedroom. The photograph appeared to have been taken from inside the house. Daniel immediately recognized the room, but there was one detail that terrified him. At the end of the hallway stood a dark figure, and directly in front of it were 3 wet footprints. Daniel turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 4 words. You left them behind. He never discovered who sent the photograph. And to this day, the identity of the person or thing responsible for the footsteps remains unexplained. Daniel never returned to that house. But the story doesn't end there, because months later, the new owner called him. He had one question. Did you ever hear footsteps upstairs? Daniel didn't answer. The man continued. Because every night at exactly 2:13, someone walks down the hallway. Then came a long silence, and finally the man whispered, but last night the footsteps stopped outside my bedroom. Daniel felt his blood run cold, because he already knew what came next. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The same 3 knocks he had heard months earlier. Daniel hung up. He never spoke to that man again. But there is one detail about this story that still has no explanation. The house had cameras installed after Daniel moved out. On the nights when the footsteps were heard, the cameras showed an empty hallway. No person, no shadow, nothing. Just the sound of footsteps moving through the house. And then at exactly 2:13 a.m., the camera facing Daniel's old bedroom briefly went black. When it came back on, 3 wet footprints were visible on the floor. No one had entered. No one had left. And the final frame showed something even stranger. A bedroom door slowly opening from the inside. So if you ever find yourself alone at night and you hear footsteps approaching your door, don't open it. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't seeing what's standing outside. It's realizing the footsteps were never coming toward you. They were waiting for you to follow them. And if you hear 3 knocks tonight, whatever you do, don't knock back.